This new decade kicked off with global challenges that impacted every single industry, and construction was no exception to this. But if we can take a silver lining in the COVID pandemic, I think it would be the rapid acceleration of the digital transformation that has occurred. I'm Todd Wyant, host of the Bridging the Gap podcast, sponsored by Applied Software. We're focusing in on recent guests of the podcast who have come on to share their insights and their expertise in how the COVID pandemic has impacted the construction industry and really the aftermath of where we go from here. What do you see as some of the workflow changes, whether in manufacturing or construction, that will come out of this current disruption?
Okay, what are your key priorities? Is it learning right now? Like, do you need to get your teams up to speed on something that's been on the back burner? This is a great time to catch up on some, continuous learning. There is a lot of work coming. It's just, how do we prioritize? And it's almost breaking it up into chunks of big rocks versus little rocks. And I think that's a great way to start versus feeling overwhelmed, oh my gosh, because it's easy to get, go down that path.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I think just kind of centering, taking a moment, balancing, recalibrating, and getting with your teams, just huddling and talking about it. I think that kind of gives clarity and just a greater sense of purpose, and hopefully people will, feel a little bit more, comfortable.
Yeah. So we're all in the midst of this social distancing with COVID-19 disruption going on. How do you see that serving as a catalyst for digital transformation?
So I think this whole thing is really shedding a light on our inability to go digital and go remote. I mean, obviously construction, you can't, certain things we can do more things off-site, and it's certainly pushing that. But construction by nature is a physical activity, so you need to have guys there. But everybody else that supports that system, really, a lot of our folks on the technology side can do a lot of their work from home, but we find these little pinch points where you can't, and it's really exposing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really curious at the longer term ramifications of all this with everybody just totally up in the air, trying to figure it out remote. And I think there's going to be some things that people were like, oh yeah, that was really good. And then there's other things that's that was totally inefficient. Why would we ever go back to that way of thinking again?
Well, and there's cultural things too. Prior to this pandemic, I was never one to typically turn my camera on because it's that. And it's interesting because in Australia, everybody turns their cameras on, and a lot of Europe and UK as well. But for some reason, in the US, we don't like turning our cameras on. Right. But ever since the pandemic, I've been just been turning mine on. And it's kind of an interesting social experiment to see, all right, who else is going to turn theirs on too?
Yeah, for sure. What do you think are some of the positives that have actually come out of all this disruption?
But we had a couple departments within our company that just could not go paperless. They said they can't do it. And now they figured out how they could do it. They didn't have any choice. Us baby boomers were having a hard time understanding how people could be productive working remotely. And so we weren't really as willing to be quite as flexible. I would say we are okay. We already had 2 or 3 people that were working remotely that lived in different areas, but we still overall felt like you really can't do your job remotely. And maybe we're coming to the realization that to a certain degree, you can do your job remotely. And we want to bring people back for the culture, but we're saying, hey, a couple days a week, can you be here? But you could go ahead and work from home a few days a week as well. So.
What do you see as the future state of the industry coming out if we're looking at a year out from now?
We see a lot more thought put into all of the elements of construction before we actually pour concrete. I think there's a lot of in the past it's been a lot easier just to say, hey, we'll make that decision on site. Let's just cut it to this and we'll cut it down on site. Let's just take a lot of shortcuts, whether that be on schedule or whether that be on the design or whether that be on the actual prefab portion. and everything will be, fixed on site. And I think that will still be necessary. There will still be elements that need to be fixed on site, and the expertise needs to be there. However, I think there will be a drive to bring all of that a lot of that thought forward into the planning process. That's what I would say would be a big change.
Big thanks to all the guests who have come on to share their expertise on the COVID impact and aftermath. Make sure to check out the Bridging the Gap podcast. You can go to our website, bridgingthegappod.com, or you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Keep innovating.